This is Mike Corey from ESPN, and you're listening to the Sports Objective Podcast, the unofficial podcast of the Pirates.
Yeah. My heart is purple and gold. I'm a pirate down to my soul, and I don't back down, not at all. Find out when the cannons explode. From the sidelines down to the post, put it down like not even close. All out to the last whistle blow. From the flag with the soul and crossbones. Everybody stand up.
Welcome into the Sports Objective. We appreciate you tuning in whenever and however you're watching or listening, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook, or of course, pretty much anywhere podcasts are found. You can find us. Love this time of year. I always love March Madness and everything that brings. And right now, to talk about that, I'm very excited to welcome back to the show a guy who's a regular this time of year for us, and that's Mike DeCourcy from the Sporting News as well as the Big Ten Network. Mike, we appreciate your time.
Good morning, Bubba. How are you?
Doing well. We've seen some tremendous results already, tremendous finishes, a variety of leagues across the country, have already you've had teams earn their automatic bids. Let's start off close to home. The American Athletic Conference is getting underway today down at Dickies Arena in Fort Worth, Texas. Obviously, as you know, we're East Carolina guys, so we're playing Cincinnati. But when you look at this league, you had Houston make the Final Four a season ago. They've had another excellent season, although they've lost some games here recently. Memphis has really come on as they've gotten healthy, and then SMU's had another solid year.
Yeah, I think that Houston would have been looking at challenging for another Final Four were it not for the two injuries that they suffered to their if not their starting five, then certainly the high end of their rotation. Tremont Mack and Marcus Sasser, just two very fine players. Sasser was outstanding. He was going to be the lead player on Houston's attempt to go back to the Final Four, and not having those two players. I mean, imagine how many teams out there could have lost two of their top five scorers, including their leading scorer, and been able to go out and still win their conference. I think that they've had a remarkable season, but given the circumstances with those two players injured, you've seen them lose twice to Memphis and once to SMU. So they have two other NCAA tournament level teams in their conference, and they lost three of the four games. So I don't think that Houston is going to have quite the same march that they did a year ago. And I don't think that doesn't mean that Kelvin Sampson hasn't done an amazing job this year.
Now, what do you think about the Memphis Tigers? Obviously, Penny Hardaway was feeling some heat from the local media. Not so sure, whether that was the case from the folks who mattered there in Memphis in terms of the administration and high-level donors. But as the Tigers have gotten healthy, they've won, 10 out of 11 now, defeated Houston twice, and they really seem to have it rolling at the right time.
It's interesting because some of that was self-generated. I mean, the Heat basically grew out of the fact that he criticized his veteran players so publicly in an interview with Seth Davis. I did not think that criticism was entirely fair at the time, because although Landers Nolley a year ago I thought was very tunnel visioned, let's say, very focused on getting up whatever shots he could, whether they were good shots, bad shots, indifferent. I did not think that he had a great approach on offense, but I thought that when they added the two freshmen that they did, Jalen Duren and Imani Bates, that they would make a concerted effort to use the talent of those two players to get Nolley excellent shots. And you get Landers Nolley excellent shots, and that guy can make them with anybody, and I mean anybody, in the college game. And they didn't seem to make much of an effort to do that. They seemed to be much more oriented toward trying to make Bates and Duren, especially Bates, feel comfortable with the college level, comfortable with whatever assignments they were presented. And Bates in particular wasn't necessarily performing to his level. And Penny chose to make it about the veterans. And I'm not saying he was totally wrong, but I'm also saying they may have had a case for feeling like that they had stuck around when the transfer portal was wide open for everybody, man. It was like, you want to magically appear in Westwood, California, or Lexington, Kentucky, or Bloomington, Indiana, or wherever, you could do that. And they chose to stick around as Tigers. And I don't think that choice was necessarily embraced as much by the head coach as it should have been. So he created that for himself. And then he followed that up by reacting badly to the question that he was asked in the press conference. I don't know that I would have asked it in that environment. If I wanted to ask Penny Hardaway what he thought about his future at the program, or whether he could get it going or whatever, I think I would have personally done that privately with him, because I wouldn't want to share the answer with everybody else, for one. But asking the question itself was not an unfair question at all. It was a totally reasonable question at that point, when they had been in the program for multiple years. I think Penny took over in 18-19, so this is year 4. I don't think it's unfair to ask that question. So I thought Penny should have handled it better. But subsequent to that, he did get back DeAndre Williams healthy. He does pretty much have his full component of players, but he doesn't have Imani Bates. I don't want to hang their success on his absence. I don't know that's fair to the young man, but I don't think they've missed him.
Now, kind of shifting gears and taking a look at the SMU Mustangs, Tim Jankovich Ball Club. Last I saw, they were somewhere, in the mid to upper 40s in the net. What do you think their chances are of getting into the field, and what do they need to do down at the AAC tournament to make that happen?
Well, what's interesting about the current circumstance for the American in terms of getting the most number of teams in the field is that if Memphis were to win the tournament, I think they could maybe get to an advantaged position, or at least relative to the lower part of the field. I think that Memphis has a chance with a win over SMU and a win over Houston to maybe climb to a 7. I don't think the committee is going to want the Tigers and Carolina in an 8-9 game. I don't think they want teams like that with such great potential to be there available to pounce on the 1 seed in the second in the second round of the tournament. So I think that with those 2 wins, Memphis could climb up there. So that would be great for the American to have a team climb up that high that has basically all their players and a lot of components to do well in this tournament. But if they do that, then it might hurt SMU. It might knock them out. SMU might need a win over Memphis, probably does, to get into the field. It would certainly hurt Houston's seed as well, which has taken multiple blows over the last few weeks, as we mentioned at the Open. So I think as it stands now, SMU is one of my last teams in. I think you'll see that a lot of places, that they are among the last teams in. I just don't know if they can hold that without sufficient success. And success in the American tournament this year means beat Houston or beat Memphis, beat Houston or Memphis, or beat them both.
Now, before we work our way back to the Big Ten, which you cover on a regular basis, and like you mentioned, you do the Fox Sports Field of 68 brackets. So wanted to ask you about some other leagues, as well as some Cinderellas and potential bracket busters. But, I mentioned the American Championship taking place down in Fort Worth, Texas at Dickies Arena. In that region, obviously the Big 12, you have Baylor, Kansas, Texas, so many quality clubs. What do you think about some of them and their chances in the big dance?
I really like the Big 12. I think it's been an amazing year for that league. I don't know that there's ever been a league that had 0 bad teams in it. I don't think there ever has. I covered the Big East in 1991 when it was a 9-team league at that point. 7 of them made the NCAA tournament. The 8th, Providence, could easily have been in there. The 9th, though, was a bad team, and everybody took turns picking on Boston College when they could. So I think BC won 1 game that year in the league. So that was probably as close to this as I've seen. This year, having to play in that league for teams such as Kansas, Baylor, or you go down to the middle, TCU, Texas, et cetera, it was really hard because there was no nights off. Kansas State could play the heck out of you and beat several people. Oklahoma State, we've seen them beat really good teams. You look down at the bottom. West Virginia, although they faded late, started the league as a clear tournament contender, and I think it was the league that beat them down more than anything. If they had been in a conference that had multiple poor teams, I think that they could have been successful at attaining a tournament bid. So I have great respect for what Baylor's done, great respect for what Texas has done, Texas Tech has done, what Kansas has done. They've all had tremendous seasons, and that's why their seeds on my bracket and pretty much everybody else's are so high on the field.
Moving to the ACC, last weekend you obviously had Coach K, his swan song, if you would, in terms of his final home game there at Cameron. The party was crashed by North Carolina. You referenced the Tar Heels earlier. They've really seemed to be playing much better of late. So how do you see that impacting Duke? Do you think, Coach K in his ceremony post-game, he said that, hey, trust me, this will propel us to where you all want it to go. So do you see that being the case? And who else in the ACC do you really like, or do you think there's anybody that, whether it be at North Carolina or otherwise, that can make a little run?
Yeah, I think Carolina is dangerous, and that's why I said the committee trying to keep them out of an 8-9 game, I think, is important relative to the top of the field, because the top of this field is very vulnerable. I know they don't want their number one seeds to lose if they don't have to. I've always looked at the 8-9 as almost a demotion from a 10 seed, so to speak. It's kind of like a plank across a body of water. You want to try to tread past that 8-9 game, if go from a 10 to a 7. If you're a team like Carolina, I think that's for them to do that. They probably would have to win this tournament. And I don't think that if Duke were to lose it, I don't think they'll lose it to. Although that could happen if they lost early in this event. If they lost the final, I think they could still get a 2, probably would. And they think they probably would still start in Greenville for their first 2 games. But they would lose a lot of the geographic preference in terms of the region. I know they would rather be in Chicago or Philadelphia than have to travel to Texas or California. So we'll see what happens with that. But if they win this thing, Duke, I think they're in very good shape, in a very good spot to get not only the 2 seed that they have in mind right now, but also a chance to play where they want to play. Carolina, I think, could do well, but only if they play with the same passion and confidence that they played in the final 10 to 12 minutes of the Duke game. The first half of that game, Carolina was just the same Carolina. Let's not forget that. And if they're that Carolina, they're not staying in this tournament very long. There are too many good teams out there that can take advantage of that, and have several of them. So they have to play with that kind of ferocity that they played those final dozen minutes or so. And that starts with R.J. Davis going downhill. That starts with that continues with the confidence that Brady Manick shot the ball. He doesn't always play with that kind of belief, especially since he moved to Carolina. He has not played with that belief, but he did that night, and he was phenomenal. Davis was phenomenal. Caleb Love was very good. Baycott was excellent, as he usually has been. But we've seen over the course of this year what Baycott's consistent excellence has done for them. Not a ton when they play the best teams. They have to have more. And on Saturday night, in the last dozen minutes, they had everything they have. I don't expect them to play at that level of every game. It's not likely, because that's not who they've been for most of the season. But if they play with that tenacity, they can be close. And that could make them very dangerous to every team on the field. Every team on the bracket would have trouble with that Carolina.
How many teams do you see the ACC ended up getting into the tournament?
Well, I've had 5 for most of the time, and I've been criticized on occasion by fans on the various boards, Twitter and all that, for having that many. But what they miss is that the vast majority of them, aside from Duke, are all playing in double-digit seed territory. I don't have right now a single other ACC team with a single-digit seed. I had Wake with a 9, which isn't a great seed, but I had them with a 9 going into yesterday. I've dropped them to a 12. I think they're now fighting. They're basically sitting there hoping that everybody else loses in their territory. Indiana, big game for them. You want that, if you're Wake, you want that to be a loss for them because it could add another Big Ten team to the field. They got some luck with Xavier after they went down. Xavier's loss helped Wake. But that's the kind of position that they're in. Miami, I don't think they can afford to hurt themselves early in the ACC tournament. And it's not impossible for them. They've done it before. Because they could easily be in the field now if they hadn't dropped some of the February games that they did. Now, on the other hand, you have the 2 Virginia schools, Virginia and Virginia Tech, both with the opportunity to climb in. It's not going to be easy, and they would damage the case of some of the other teams like Carolina, Notre Dame, et cetera, to get there. But they're not out of it. They're not in it, but they're not out of it.
You had the Big Ten tournament getting underway with Northwestern and Penn State posting victories. Do a lot of work, obviously covering the Big Ten for the Big Ten network. So just, do you think Purdue's going to win the tournament, and you think Purdue's the best chance over Wisconsin and Illinois to make a deep run and potentially cut down the nets?
I don't think the defense at Purdue is strong enough to expect them to win a championship. I could see them with a good bracket with a good draw. I think I could see them making a run to the Final Four. But it's impossible to say about that until I see who they play. Their defense just isn't good enough. I mean, you don't win the NCAA championship with the number 100+ defense at Ken Palm. It just doesn't happen. You have to be better than that. And they haven't been able to solve that problem. It just hasn't been there for them. So I don't see them I don't see them winning the championship. I don't expect anybody in the Big Ten to win the championship. But if anybody did, I've said this all along, really since the beginning of the year, that if anybody in the Big Ten was cut out to win a championship, it would be Illinois. Illinois, the problem that they have is that Andre Curbelo, their the sophomore point guard who was expected to be one of the best point guards in the country this year, missed 6 weeks early in the season, and they had to move on without him and build a different structure, different approach, and they did it very successfully. Now he doesn't really fit into that well, so they have to change up a little bit when he comes in, and that throws off their rhythm some. But when he's really good, he's really good. If you watched him in the second half against Iowa, a game that he helped them win, nearly helped them lose, but at his best, he's one of the best creators in college basketball. He can get by anybody. He can finish with real flair. He's physically tough, even though he's kind of wiry. He's got physical and mental toughness, but he takes unbelievable chances. In the Iowa game, inside the final 2 minutes, they had a multi-possession lead at 1.6, 1.5. On one of those possessions, he came down and took a shot. Well, actually, he didn't take a shot. He took a drive down the left side in the first 7 seconds of the shot clock. And when he got there, he was stopped. And so he tried to invent a pass across the lane with a left hand across the baseline, and it went out of bounds. And that you can't lose possessions like that at that stage of the game. And then on another one, he tried to split 2 defenders by going behind his back. One of the defenders was behind his back, and so that ball got turned over. And they eventually had to take him out of the game, which they did not want to do. They wanted to have him out there because he's their best ball handler and their best creator and their best perimeter defender, or one of their 2 best perimeter defenders. And instead, they had to take him out in order to finish the game. He's got to play. He's got to be out there for them to win the biggest games, but he can't play like that if they're going to finish them off.
Shifting out west, Gonzaga's obviously had another stellar season. Then you have Arizona right there, number 2 in the polls, 28-3. UCLA excuse me, UCLA and USC have also had very solid years. Do you see anybody, or like who do you like out west and that can make a run, be it Arizona and Gonzaga, et cetera?
Well, when people have asked me for who I think will win it, without a bracket, my default answer has been Arizona, because although I don't love them, I don't love any team this year. I think they're all flawed in significant ways, and more so than probably any time in the last 7 years or so. I think like a lot like 2014, when the best teams were all flawed. I think that that's a lot like this year. And so when someone asks me who to go with now, I look at Arizona, and I think they have flaws, but I think they're less profound than some of the other teams. Their strengths are probably a little bit less as well, but I worry about the flaws more than I'm concerned about the strengths. They have enough strengths to have won all but 3 games. So I think they're plenty good. It's harder to pick them apart than it is some of the other teams. So I don't know that consistency wins the tournament, and I think it will change a bit when we get a bracket. But for now, I think Arizona has the best chance.
You referenced Illinois just a few minutes ago. Obviously, one of their former head coaches, Bruce Weber, is now the head coach at Kansas State. And I just received an alert on my phone. Wanted to see if you knew anything about this. Bruce Weber said that he will not get a haircut until the NCAA punishes cheating teams. So that is certainly an interesting headline.
Well, I guess it depends on which team he's talking about, because some of those teams have been punished. So I have a feeling that the one he's referring to that's under investigation is not far from his campus, let's say.
Right.
Yeah, I respect Bruce greatly. I think he does a great job. I've heard a lot of rumbling from their fan base that they're not happy with where they are. He's done a really good job there, and this year he was probably about 2 players away from being really significant in a conference that was hard to be significant in. I think what I want when I have a coach is that, especially in the college level, is do my guys play hard for him all the time? And I think you could see that at K-State, that they definitely did. So I do think that they need to make sure that they get more players in for next season. And if that doesn't happen, I could see where they would want to make a move. But I think it's premature and short-sighted to make a move now. They look at Iowa State and say, well, look, they were terrible last year. They brought in a bunch of transfers and got good. But I don't think that that's necessarily a recipe for long-term success. I mean, you're not going to hit it out of the park in the transfer market every year. TJ Otzelberger is an excellent recruiter, and I'm sure he'll build a very fine program there. But there was some good fortune in what happened this year there. I would rather, if I'm K-State, I would rather stick with Bruce until it's been proven that he can't get the players in there that are necessary to win. And I'm not sure that's been established. They've won the conference twice. No one but Kansas had won the conference. I think Texas might have shared one somewhere along the way, and somebody else might have shared one. But I mean, for K-State to win the conference twice, and when they had rarely won it before Bruce came along, I think you have to look at that and say that he's had successful times there, and that it would be premature and a mistake to move him out.
Final question for you is really a 2-part question. Teams and both individuals to look out for. From a team standpoint, one of the great things about this time of year are those Cinderella stories, the bracket busters. You have teams like you have an awesome story at Longwood where you have somebody that was in the business world and as I guess as a lawyer, I think, for nearly 2 decades, in Griff Aldrich. That's a tremendous headline there. You had Loyola Chicago, the Ramblers are back in the mix, Sister Jean. And then you have a program like Murray State that's already won 30 games going into the tournament. So, who do you like to maybe make a run and turn some heads? And then from an individual standpoint, maybe players that have flown under the radar. A guy like at Bryant the other night, Peter Kiss.
Peter Kiss, yes.
Yeah, what an interesting story that was, and also an unfortunate situation that transpired up there in Smithfield. But, what are your thoughts on some of those topics?
Well, among the teams that I think could make a run, I think Murray's a really good example. I mean, one of the things that I discovered a while back was, and I think the committee should have more respect for teams like Murray. If you dominate your conference to that level, it almost doesn't matter what conference you're in. The teams that win at that level usually do well in this tournament. I came up with this thing I called the 801 Club. Teams that won more than 80% of their games have a phenomenal record in this tournament, especially since they're often up against it in seeding, like Murray has been in the past, like any double-digit seed is. You'd be amazed at how many times teams that win at that level, and it's not easy to win more than 80% of your games in any league. And don't forget, you also have to do that. I'm not talking about 80% of your conference games. I'm talking about 80% of the games in the season. So a team like Murray, a team like Chattanooga or Toledo or whoever, they're usually going to play a lot of difficult non-conference games, difficult because they're either playing power teams or they're playing away from home, something the power teams often don't do very regularly. So you win at that level, there's something to it. And so I would be on the lookout for teams like that when I go to pick a bracket. I don't know that there are many others other than Murray this year that can fit that criteria, but that's a really strong group. In terms of other teams, I mean, Toledo, if they could get in, they've been knocking on the door of the tournament for so long. Todd Kowalczyk there has had really successful programs at Toledo, but they've just never been able to get over the hump in the Mid-American Conference, which is so competitively balanced. There's so many teams in there that are good, that win basketball games at a high level, Ohio U, et cetera. Ohio U beat Virginia in last year's tournament. That's kind of the thing that happens a lot of the times in that conference. They come out, they're so competitively sharp because they've had to be in order to get out of that league. So I would watch out for Toledo as well. Whether or not we have another Max Asmus this year, I'm not sure. It depends somewhat on who gets in. You mentioned Peter Kiss. Peter has high major experience. He played at Rutgers. He started his career at Rutgers before deciding to transfer to Bryant, and it's worked out really beautifully for him. And I think he would have been in a pretty significant logjam for playing time at Rutgers over the last couple of years. They've never been short on guards, so it's been really good to see him do what he's done at that level. And I'd look out as well for North Texas. The league that they're in, the Conference USA, which has a really good team in UAB, a really, really good team in Louisiana Tech. Louisiana Tech star player Kenneth Lofton Jr. was the hero of this past summer's U19 World Cup. He took on Zach Edey, Purdue's Zach Edey, who's 7'4", 7'5", and at 6'6", 280, undid him. And then he came back in the next game, and Victor Wembanyama, who's considered the most gifted prospect who's not currently in the NBA worldwide, and just basically broke him in half with his low post moves. Victor is tall and long. I mean, his arms reach from one end of the United States to the other, and Lofton just destroyed him. And North Texas swept that team and did a great job on Lofton. So they have tournament experience as well. At least some of their players were on last year's team that beat Purdue in the field. So I really like them, and that's not assuring they get through, because I mentioned how good the other teams are. But if they do, they'll be a team to watch out for.
Now, obviously, you gave us your thoughts as far as who you think could win it, but without the bracket at your disposal, right now, if you had to say who's going to cut down the nets here in a few weeks, who do you think it'll be?
Yeah, like I said, with no bracket, I'm going Arizona, but I could do a complete 180 on that when I see one. To be honest with you, when I look at my bracket, I'm talking about Arizona in a vacuum. But when I look at my bracket and I have Kentucky as their number 2, I don't love that. I mean, I like Arizona against Providence to get to the Elite Eight. This is, like I said, this is based on my bracket, but I don't like Arizona against Kentucky if they get that far. So it's hard to pick a team that you feel really confident in, because, as I said, every team a little bit flawed, some of them a lot flawed. And when I say a lot flawed, that's some of the teams that are on the top 2-3 lines of the bracket.
Really appreciate your time this morning, Mike. Been very generous spending a half hour with us. Before we let you go, tell folks how they can follow you on social media, and then also where they can read your work.
Yeah, well, you see on the screen at TSN Mike is my Twitter. My brackets will appear daily until through Sunday at CBB on Fox. My picked bracket, my selected bracket, once we get it, will be posted on Sporting News at Sporting News, and as well as my own at TSN Mike. And you can see me on FS1 Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Thursday and Friday, making selections or discussing the NCAA bracket on FS1 in between games of the Big East tournament. And then on Saturday and Sunday, you can catch me on Big Ten Network as part of the studio setup at Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis, talking about the Big Ten tournament and the rest of the nation as well.
Again, really appreciate it, and take care. And here's to a lot of excitement over the next few weeks.
Thanks, Bubba. Enjoy it.